Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Adamson, and I'd like to welcome you all today to have a discussion around employee engagement, and more importantly, how do we successfully maintain engagement and increase engagement of a remote workforce in the environment that we're working within, with all the restrictions that are faced upon us. So thank you very much for joining me today. David Adamson is my name. That's what I look like in case you were curious. I currently don't have a tie on. I need a haircut, and I might actually grow a beard if I'm forced to stay at home too much longer. But anyway, let's keep going. Sorts of things we'll talk about today. We'll look at the context, what we mean by engagement and remote workforces. We'll look at some of the factors. We'll look at some of the issues that are facing employees at home, and then we'll look at some of the remedies and actions and things that, as HR professionals, we want to continue and introduce to ensure that staff are focused on what's important whilst maintaining their own work-life balance, which can be very difficult. Over the last 6 months, various countries in various parts of the world have had to engage in restrictive work practices to stop the spread of disease. Most employees have had to work from home for a certain amount of time, and the longer amount of time that people do work from home, the more stress it puts on people. People become less productive. They feel isolated. They feel like they're missing out. They feel like they need to have a connection. It can become very distressing for a lot of people. So this is when we start to need to engage people and make sure that we've got the right tools in place, the right processes, and we've got the right functions in place to make sure that we keep the workforce engaged and keep on top of the issues that our workforce is facing. The key challenges that we've found, that we've experienced ourselves and we find with our workforce, is people coming to grips with working from home. A lot of people have never done this before, and a number of people have got quite restrictive premises to be able to work from. And this can be very problematic. Some people like to work from 9 to 5, other people like to work at various hours, but when we're working from home, it means we have to change the way we work. And when we change the way we work, it can become a little bit of a surprise, it can become challenging. It can make us feel somewhat isolated because we're wondering, is this the right thing to do? Who are my work colleagues? Who are my friends? How can I connect with them on a regular basis? Can I just go and tap someone on the shoulder and have a chat to them? How do I connect with people? Do I need to make an appointment just to talk to somebody? I become anxious and stressful. If I become anxious and stressful, that impacts on my mental health. It can impact on my work-life balance. It can also impact on the productivity within the organization. I can become a little bit distracted. I might be looking for clarity. Because I don't have that immediate connection with people, I need to start to understand how I can start to motivate myself. What's the direction I'm heading in? These sorts of things. So many people become challenged by a number of these. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are many of the issues that we find that people are faced with. And as HR professionals, we need to start to look at how we can help people work through these challenges to maintain their own sense of purpose, and also how as an organisation we can make sure that the organisation continues to hum along at the pace that we want it to. So let's just have a look at some of the impacts of some of these items that I've just raised, some of the challenges. This has got lots of information on here, so we'll talk through it. Once we start to have a remote workforce, we start to have some challenges with productivity. We may start to have people leaving organisations, an attrition rate. We may start to have our profitability affected. If profitability is impacted, does that mean that we have to start looking at employee layoffs or a leaner workforce? Do we have to do more with less, or is the organisation able to sustain its revenues and its profitability? If it does have a profitability issue, does that mean that we then have to look at how we do reconstruct the workforce within the organisation? These sorts of things put tremendous stress on the workforce, worrying about their own role, worrying about the future of the business, but also wondering how they're going to be productive. What connection are they having back to the organisation? Are they doing what's necessary to ensure that the organisation succeeds? And if there start to be employee layoffs or some attrition, does that impact the brand of the organisation? Does word get out that the organisation is having some challenges? Does that mean that it has trouble attracting the right talent? Does it mean that it costs us more to attract the right talent? These are many, many elements that we need to balance when looking at the working from home, the remote workforce impacts on our workforce. And as HR professionals, it means that this is when we need to really start connecting what we're doing as an HR department and connecting back to the purpose of the business. So it's a terrific opportunity here for all HR people to say, rightio, we know how to manage people, we know about processes, how can we connect this back to the organisation outcome? How can we make sure that we're engaging people in the right way to ensure that they've got the right work-life balance, that they still feel connected to the organisation, and that we're making sure that we're looking after their mental health appropriately? It's a really important part. So some organisations are finding this difficult to do. Some have been in a remote working environment for many, many years, just by the nature of the business. Either way, it's something we need to refresh ourselves on, look at the best way of getting this balance right. Because if we get it right, our staff appreciate it, our employees are engaged, they're connected back to the business, and the business thrives. So let's have a look at a little bit about what we mean by engagement. Engagement, Vanessa Porter is a consultant we work with, and this is her definition around engagement, which is absolutely accurate. What I like to think about employee engagement is when we've got people who are looking to go that extra mile without having to be asked, people who believe in the focus of the organisation, believe in the purpose of the organisation, and understand how their contribution helps the organisation. Now, the organisation can be simply the people I work with. It can be the department, it can be the overall group. But we want to make sure that people have purpose and they feel empowered to make the right decisions. So there are many, many drivers behind engagement. And when we do run engagement surveys and we look at engagement analytics, these are the 8 groups, if you like, or drivers that we are looking at to find out, do we have an engaged workforce? Now, you note here that reward is down the bottom here. Paying people a lot of money is a nice thing to do. And to be honest and frank, there's only one company that pays the most in your industry, and it's usually not the company you're working with. So reward is important, fair reward for effort. But what drives engagement are things like my commitment. Do I have the right to make decisions? Do I have the ability? Am I empowered? Is the organisation giving me the tools to be able to make the right decisions? Do I have the right level of data to be able to do this? Am I committed to the business? Do I find that my work-life balance is fine? Do I have time for my family? Am I comfortable with the balance that I have there? Is my manager someone I like to work with? Are my colleagues people I can trust? People who I can bounce ideas off? People with whom I can just simply jump on a video call at any time. I don't need to make an appointment to talk to somebody, just to chat over something. We've got in there as well performance management, and I'll come to performance management a little bit later on in a positive way. Performance management is not about the negative aspects of managing poor performance, but it's making sure that people know what they need to do to be successful. And of course, career growth. How am I going to progress through the organisation? It's a really important purpose element for someone to know what they're doing within a business, how their career is going to grow, what difference they make to the organisational outcome. So these 8 key drivers are the things that we need to focus on as HR professionals to understand how we can improve the engagement of our workforce. There's a company that put out a survey some years ago and had a number of questions in there. And one of them was, what don't you like about your manager? It's a bit of a negative question, but it was one that had some interesting results. So some of the feedback we saw in this particular survey was that a manager can be a great person, but a lousy manager. Now, by that, we mean quality of management. If your manager and your senior management doesn't give you direction on what's happening within the organization, that's a problem. I need to know what the business is trying to achieve in the business. What's its mission? What's the main goals it's trying to achieve over the next 12 months? If I understand what the organization is trying to do, then I can start to connect to it. If I don't know what the organization is trying to do, then my manager has not communicated to me the purpose of the business. I'm going to have a challenge. Do I have the opportunity to give feedback and also receive feedback? Am I appreciated? These are really important aspects of having regular catch-ups with your peers, with your manager, with your team, to be able to give that freedom of feedback. Feedback needs to be constructive. If I don't have the opportunity to give feedback or receive feedback, then I'm going to feel isolated and unappreciated, and that's a problem. If that's occurring and I don't know what the business is really trying to achieve, then my stress levels are going to be high. If my stress levels are high, I'm probably going to be worried about where my career is going. So those 4 top elements there, the biggest drivers about what do I think of my manager, can be overcome by good quality management. Beyond that, we start to get into the factors that we don't have enormous controls over, but we have some. Salary, for instance, as I mentioned earlier in reward, we can pay people the amount that we believe that we have budgeted for, that we're able to position appropriately in the market where we need to be. But it's very rare that we'll be in the highest paying company that in our industry. So salary is usually number 4, 5, or 6 on the engagement drivers there. It's never number 1. And then we get down to things like workplace environment. Do I have a healthy workplace environment? Very difficult to do at the moment when we're working from home. We are relying on people to see if they can establish a quiet and separate place where they can work from home. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. And that then falls into the hours of work as well. Families where they've got small kids need to balance that work-life type environment, make sure that when I am working, I'm working, and that might be at sporadic times during the day, but I've got the freedom and the flexibility to be able to get my work done as well as attend to my family and be there when they need them as well. So I want to make sure that as a manager, we can be a good manager, and a good manager will give great quality feedback, the ability to give feedback back to the manager as well, will give direction on what the business is, where it's heading, and we'll try and reduce stress. We'll be alert to the anxiety levels of the staff and trying to figure out what we can do to make sure that that person has the best balance in these environments to be able to get a better outcome. An engaged organisation will thrive. Most managers and many executives absolutely follow on the basis, if I look after the people who work in the business, then the business will thrive. And this is from Doug Conant, who is the Campbell Soup CEO. And you can see the stats there. I don't need to read that out. But when they focused on improving the engagement of their workforce, they found that their organisation increased 3 times in results compared with their competitors. And this was not focusing on marketing or price positioning, it was focusing on re-engaging their staff, making sure they understood the purpose of the business, why it's important, and making sure they felt as one within the organisation, a very powerful driver. So let's have a look at some of the things that we can do as HR professionals to understand the status of the engagement of our workforce and also how we can improve things. So we like surveys. Surveys, it's very difficult to argue with data. So we like to say, let's run an engagement survey. An engagement survey will give you real data to know if your organisation is engaged or not, and in what areas they're engaged or not, and against what particular factors that they're engaged or not. From here, we can start to determine and focus on the priority areas that we need to re-engage people upon to make sure that we're managing our mental health and well-being of our employees appropriately, making sure they've got everything necessary that they need to feel connected to the business, and therefore by doing that, protecting the business itself. Because if the business fails, we're going to be in strife. Everyone's going to lose a job, but for the business to thrive, we need to make sure that people are engaged. We'll look after the people will make sure the business thrives. So once we've got data, we can act on it. Without data, we're really just guessing, and I don't like guessing or making assumptions. I like data. We talk about a performance management system simply to make sure that people know what their goals are and how they're tied back to the organisational outcomes. Now, every business will have a strategy or a 12-month plan, and that usually revolves around things like financial sustainability, increasing market growth, operational excellence, and these sorts of things. So having even a basic performance management system is important. And this means connecting everyone's objectives back to the strategy. So I know what my personal KPIs or goals are, and I know what part of the organisational strategy or plan that it connects back to. That way I know what my contribution is to the outcomes of the business. want to make sure that it's a collaborative experience, that both managers and employees both participate in setting objectives, so everyone has a buy-in to the objectives that we have set. Now, one of the challenges with performance management systems in the past is that many organizations have set it at the start of the year and then waited till the end of the year to actually review how things are going. And that's a fail, because people need regular updates. And we talk about regular updates as having regular one-on-ones. Now, if we look at the top part of this particular chart, traditionally people have received an objective, then they might have an interim review in 6 months, but definitely a final review at the end of the year. During that time, there's been little or no opportunity to have a regular discussion about how things are proceeding, what support the person needs, and giving the right feedback. Going to below the line there, our suggestion is that you increase the frequency of having one-on-one catch-ups to monthly or even weekly. In our organisation, we have weekly catch-ups. So I catch up with my manager and I catch up with my team individually every week, and we simply ask the question, how are you going against your objectives? Do you need some help? Do you need some support? What's working? What's not working? That way, we're taking bite-sized chunks of helping our team succeed, making sure that they know what's working, what's not working, where we can support them to give them the best chance of achieving a positive outcome at the end of the year review. And we know this really creates a greater level of engagement. We've been doing it for quite a number of years, and we know that the more frequent discussions gives us the ability to give better and more focused feedback on a monthly or weekly basis, rather than just waiting till the end of the year to give people a final review rating. That doesn't work. It's got to be collaborative and more frequent. The focus is important. We know what people are working on. We know what part of org success it contributes to. We have regular feedback. We've got better engaged employees. We get a better outcome. So this simply really takes that once a year approach versus multiple times a year approach a little bit more, looking at a little bit different way. You may call a performance management system performance appraisal. An appraisal simply means that we only do it once a year, but performance management means that we're having regular checkups to see how people are going, to make sure that if they need help, we can give it to them early. And that's where we want people to head. So if we start talking regularly with our teams, be it remotely or within other countries or whatever, via video call, via Zoom or Teams, then the person knows what they're doing, how correct it is. If they need some support, they get that regular feedback. They feel engaged and connected because we're talking to them regularly. Just because we're in another office or another country, or we're not able to leave home, does not mean we have a disconnected workforce. It means we've got other opportunities to be able to bring people closer together via the technologies and maintain that connection with our teams. We mustn't forget learning and development either. So we set our goals, but we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to improve their development. How they want to develop is a collaborative discussion as well. There are certainly specific skills that we want people to improve upon, but we also want them to improve their capability. And that becomes a collaborative discussion. And there's lots of online learning options for people to be able to now build up their capability, build their own development, be managing their own development of skills improvement that contribute back to getting a better outcome. And this becomes where HR really contributes to the better business outcome by connecting people and their goals back to organisational outcome, and the training they do back to being able to provide a more engaged workforce with better skills, better development capability, and people feel rewarded, comfortable. We start to break down those barriers and start to lessen the stress and anxiety that people have. Dave Hollis comes from a Hollis group. He does a lot of research. So we need to think about what new normal is going to look like and then work towards that. So the new normal is going to be different to the old normal. We don't want to go back to how we are. We've had 6 months of looking to improve processes, and now this is the opportunity for HR to really take it and move on to what we call a new normal. So that's all I've really got to talk about today. I'd like to thank you very much. We want to help you create a re-engaged organisation, give you the tools and the advice to be able to do so, and we encourage you to ask questions and also to make sure that you've got the right tools and capabilities in your environment to provide to your teams to get a better outcome. So thank you very much. I'm now looking for questions.
Thank you, David, for that wonderful presentation. So for our attendees, just to drop your questions in the chat box on the event platform. Just one question, David. What do you think would be a good frequency for a one-to-one to an employee? Like, is it good to have it like per month or?
It's a really good question. Our recommendation is to move to have a more frequent catch up than you do at the moment. So if you're catching up every 3 months with your individual staff members, we'd suggest move to a monthly basis. If you're catching up monthly now, try to move to a weekly basis. And the more frequently you have a discussion, the shorter and sharper the discussion actually becomes, because you're only talking about what's occurred over the last week or over the last month. If you're having discussions only once or twice a year, then it becomes a really long discussion and you lose focus because no one can really remember what happened 6 months ago. So the more frequent discussions, the better. Monthly is ideal. Some organizations do it more frequently, which is okay as well.
Great. Okay, we do have another question from one of our attendee. Could you please elaborate more on what you mean by quality of management?
Sure. Quality of management is not managers. We want managers to be good people, to be trustworthy, full of integrity, and someone to whom a staff member can ask questions and discuss things. And that means that the person is a good person. Now, good quality management means that they can articulate the organizational goals and make sure that people are connected back to the organization. We want people to be continuously testing if in fact the organisation is reflected in the goals and activities that my team is doing. Want to make sure that people have the opportunity to give feedback to the manager and receive feedback as well. So it needs to be a reasonably high touch type activity, but it needs to be worthwhile. We don't want them just to talk weekly about the football or about basketball or about something else. We want the discussion to be informative, to be connected back to the business, what I'm doing, the good things that I'm doing, areas that I need some support in, and how my contribution is connecting back to the organisational outcome. We also want people to be cognizant of their connection and their contribution to organisational outcome as well. So appreciation is a really important part of being a good manager, as well as being a regular contact.
Okay. Okay. Our next question is, how do you deal employees with special case such as pregnant, dealing with a certain health issue? How do you juggle in a way that those catch up doesn't stress them out?
Well, a good manager doesn't treat everyone exactly the same. They'll be aware of what stresses, what specific conditions someone might be working in or physically might be there at the moment. So your team might be a mixture of different genders, of different races, of different locations, of different family environments. You might have people, as you say, who are pregnant, or people that have young families, or people who live on their own, or with a blended family. So once we understand what the individual's environment is, then it becomes something we need to be open to. What's the best way of relating to people in their certain environments? We need to be sure that we're not trying to treat everybody exactly the same. A good manager will be aware of the stresses and anxieties and be flexible enough to make sure that contacts are made at times that suit that particular person. Working hours, workloads suit the person in the current environment that we have. So we need to be attuned to individuals, their specific needs. And that can come from having a good open dialogue with the individual to understand more about what their specific working conditions are, if you like, because everyone will have a view. So if we're receptive to talking to our teams, then we'll have a better idea on how best to relate to them.
Okay, thank you. And the next question from our audience it's regarding the feedback, that it should be a two-way process. So she mentioned that managers should be receptive to feedback too. Her question is, how can you encourage a culture of feedback?
Yes, that's a really good point. There have been many instances where if negative feedback is given to a manager, people become concerned that that might have an impact on their career or on their relationship with the individual. So our advice is when we're giving negative feedback, we try not to focus on the individual, we focus on the outcome. So we don't want to, unless we've got a behavioral challenge. If we've got a really poor behavioral issue, then we need to address it. But if my manager, if I need to give some negative feedback to my manager about a specific activity or a project or something that's occurring, then I'll focus on the outcome that's undesirable rather than what the person did. So if we can focus on what the positive outcome we want of that particular situation, then we can discuss the best way of getting a better outcome rather than criticizing the person for something that they did that got the negative outcome. I'd rather focus on how we can work together to get a positive outcome, which will then reshape the way they deal with something which resulted in the negative outcome. Does that make sense, do you think?
Yeah, it does. Okay, our next question, David, is with pulse surveys on weekly basis, how can companies quickly adapt to people's strategies in the practical world? Can you give us examples of what can be done?
I didn't quite catch the first part of that question, Edward.
Sorry, with pulse surveys on weekly basis.
Oh, okay, with more frequent pulse surveys.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. How can companies quickly adapt to people's strategies in the practical world?
Sure. Well, I'll just touch on surveys quickly. There is a risk at times that we over-survey staff, that we issue too many surveys. And if the indicator for that will be that we start to get a drop off on responses. People stop responding to surveys if they get survey fatigue. Secondly, people will stop responding to surveys if they don't see any outcomes or have any published results of the surveys that are issued. So pulse surveys are important because they do give you a touch point at frequent intervals to see if in fact the changes that an organisation is making is having an impact. So the most important aspect of having a pulse survey or an engagement survey is, one, making sure that the results are accurately and are published back to staff. Secondly, if you're going to take action on the results, and you say you are, that you actually do take action, and then you publish the results of that action later on. So people will be happy to answer surveys if in fact they see that action is taken on the results and their effort and their participation is well rewarded. The actual detail of the survey depends. So people have different pulse surveys, and people do tend to look at the commentary as well and make sure the commentary does reflect the results in there. So if the surveys are well reviewed by HR and management and action is taken on it, then there should be a good outcome.
Okay, thank you, David, for your great insights. That's all the time we have left for this session, and we do hope everyone enjoyed the presentation. Please proceed to the next session in your agenda or go to the conference agenda to view the rest of the sessions available for the rest of the day.
All right. Thank you, Edwin. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Bye-bye now.
Thank you. Thank you. This session will be ended. Thank you.